So there I was, playing Prey, a game that's pretty universally looked at as a hit, and for the first 11 hours I'm having a ball, to the point that I'm thinking about putting this in my favorite games of 2024 video at the end of the year. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I do not fuck with the horror genre, but the gameplay and exploration were so unique that I was willing to overlook it. The crafting, the atmosphere, the story, the varied combat and progression were all doing it for me. I see why the people like this game, I thought to myself. Then around the 11-hour mark, Prey switches up. Before now, enemies were scarce enough to lull you into a false sense of safety, just in time for a mimic to jump out and scare you. It often feels like you're battling more with the mental anguish of the possibility of there being an enemy being nearby than actual enemies. And I love this, but now enemies were not only much tougher, they were also much more abundant. They were everywhere, and I mean everywhere. For all intents and purposes, the game had gone from an atmospheric thriller to a straight up shooter. Frustrated, I take to the internet to see if I'm the problem. Maybe I just missed a key item to make these guys more manageable, or maybe this was only a small section of the game. I click on Trusty Old Skellup's Prey review to hear him say this.
The worst though are the endlessly spawning operated drones that appear in huge numbers towards the last third of the game. They have more HP than some of the toughest enemy aliens, and a lock-on laser that melts you, and they fly around erratically, making them tough to shoot. Killing them immediately spawns another one unless you find a way to shut down the operated dispenser, which isn't always possible depending on your playthrough style. In my view, Prey commits that cardinal sin where it attempts to increase difficulty in the latter parts of the game by increasing both the number and HP of its enemies, rather than increasing their movesets or intelligence.
Which was all the validation I needed to put a stamp and seal on my time with Prey. And that got me thinking about why sometimes you need to See, a few years ago, I would have absolutely buckled down and thrown myself at the wall until I completed Prey. I have almost a toxic relationship with perseverance, and if I start something, I have it ingrained in my psyche to finish it, or at the very least not let my work go to waste. 2 videos ago when I was talking about Dark Souls and The Last of Us Part 2, yeah, almost all of that is from scripts 2 years old meant for entirely different videos that never saw the light of day. But as I've gotten older and my time has become more limited, I've come to the realization that suffering through a game solely for the sake of completing it is nothing but fool's gold. And hey, I don't blame you if you're someone that often finds yourself in this position. Society places such a high bounty on perseverance and seeing things through until the end that even the thought of leaving something unfinished can put a shallow pit in your stomach. But in reality, depending on the situation, quitting can sometimes be the best decision to make. The sunken cost fallacy is defined as the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it's clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. This is so easy to fall victim to when it comes to gaming. How many times have you gotten a battle pass to level 60 or 70 and the end of the season is coming up in a couple weeks, so you think, I might as well grind this out, deserting other games that you'd rather be playing to devote the time into not missing out on fleeting rewards? How many times have you been gaming with the boys, the matches aren't going well, and one of them hits you with we can't get off on a loss, before losing 3 more games and ultimately ending the night in the same position anyway? Here's one that I know will get you. How many times have you been stuck on a stage or a boss and relentlessly thrown yourself at it when you know you'd be better off taking a break? Don't worry, we'll come back to this one later. Even just having purchased a game and watching it sit in your library for months or years can put you in this corner. And as the theory suggests, the more time you put into a game, the more susceptible you are to finishing it just for the sake of finishing it. It's a lot easier to shelve a game you have 2 hours in than one you spent an entire day's worth of time on. This video is mainly going to focus on single player games, but live services are the absolute kings of the sunken cost fallacy. Mixed in with a healthy dose of FOMO, login events, battle passes, and seasonal content all give players more incentive to log in and play a few rounds every day. It can get to a point where it's almost instinctual to get home, hop on Discord, and boot up Fortnite or Call of Duty. And hey, if you're actually having fun, keep at it. Just make sure you aren't logging on and playing just for the rewards. I promise it's not worth it. It might be worth it. Bruce Lee quotes, not that one, but that would be an absolutely legendary pull. No, Bruce Lee with Psychology Today quotes, as a result of giving up, my work became a lot more interesting. My newfound friends became a lot more interesting. My life in general became a whole lot more interesting. I began to see and experience possibilities that I had never anticipated. That article is a great read, and I'll link it and anything else I reference in the description, but for the TLDR, it enveloped how he envisioned a career path that wasn't quite working out for him, and pivoting ended up being one of the greatest decisions he's ever made. Like many things things in life, sometimes you boot up a game expecting one thing and actually receive another. And that's not inherently bad. Some games will pleasantly surprise you. But if you find yourself underwhelmed or dissatisfied, it may be better to follow Bruce's lead and jump ship before it sinks. Think about it like this. If you go to a restaurant and the food is absolute dog shit, regardless of how much you paid or how long you waited to receive the food, you probably wouldn't go back, right? Why should games be any different? Like restaurants, there are tens of thousands of games waiting to be played and discovered. Not every one of them is going to be for you, and that's okay. Such a small fraction of the time we have can be devoted to hobbies and interests like gaming, and coming to this realization is what caused the shift in my mindset when it comes to finishing them. Until fairly recently, it was pretty rare for me to drop a game before watching the credits roll, and because of the stigma around giving up or quitting, the rare occasion where I didn't finish a game would kind of make me feel like a failure. Especially if I stopped playing because of a spike in difficulty or because I got lost and had too much pride to seek assistance. But reframing how you look at quitting can help shift some of that pain. It's easy to default on negative thoughts pointed at yourself or the game, but if moving on to something different fills your bucket more, is quitting really as bad as people make it sound? Gregory Scott Brown with the Washington Post has a mean quote in his article, "Why quitting can be a superpower that helps with your mental health. Persevering at all costs can inhibit our ability to adapt, grow, or explore new opportunities." And he's absolutely right. All of the time you spend rage playing or playing a game just to play it could be spent on a game that actually brings you enjoyment. With that in mind, I also think it's important to look at why a game didn't click with you when you shelf it. What made you decide to start up the game in the first place? What didn't you like about it? Do you see yourself returning to it? All important questions that with a bit of introspection can hopefully point you in the direction of a game you're more fond of. My main takeaways from Prey were that I wanted a game with a thrilling atmosphere, fun crafting, and limited combat in the sense that you can't just Call of Duty your way through the game. This led me back to Sons of the Forest, a game that I enjoyed when it first released but fell off of, and while it's a little spookier than Prey, this resonated with me much more. Moving on from a game before things go too far south can also help preserve your memories of it. I can't tell you how many games I've ruined my view of with toxic perseverance. I enjoyed probably 85% of the time I spent on Prey. Had I continued to suffer through the back third of the game, that percentage just goes down and down. One of my friends recently asked me how I felt about the game because he was interested in starting it up. I was able to give him a pretty objective answer of, I like the first 2/3 of the game, but the final act rubbed me the wrong way. Had I forced myself to complete it, my answer likely would have been much more cynical. Despite the title and what the first part of this video was covered, I actually don't think finishing your games is a bad thing in most cases. If you're genuinely enjoying a game, absolutely finish it. Hell, go for all of the achievements if you're really about it. I don't want to discount that calling it quits can potentially mean missing out on content you might have otherwise enjoyed, and that's why sometimes it's also important to Sekiro is maybe the hardest game I've ever played. I wouldn't necessarily consider any of the FromSoft games to be easy, but Sekiro is in a league of its own. You're afforded a ton of flexibility with build diversity and level grinding in all of the other games, but almost none of that is echoed here. There's not any over-leveling to trivialize tough enemies, no summons to help tease the game, nothing to hold your hand as you make your way through the forgotten dungeons, snow-capped mountains, and sprawling fields of Japan. Sekiro demands perfection in a way that other Souls games don't, and you've got to play it on its own terms. The only way you're going to beat this game is by playing it enough to get good, and until you do so, you can and will hit a wall in Sekiro. I found myself at this proverbial wall only 2 hours into the game. I had 2 paths ahead of me. One led to Juzo the Drunkard and the other to Gyubu, the first real boss of the game. Hours and dozens of deaths between them go by, and every time I see this screen, I can feel myself getting angrier and angrier. This shit is so broken. Why is everything two-shotting me? I definitely parried that. A few of the many mutterings to myself as I suffer for hours until it happened. Then almost immediately it happened again. I was starting to get it. Finally feeling like I'd made progress after being at a standstill for hours, I logged out for the night. And the next play session was even worse. I don't know if it's because I took a 4-day break or if I just overestimated my abilities after a few dubs, but it's been a long time since a game has made me as mad as I was during this play session. It's a miracle I made it out with both my controllers intact and no holes in my wall. This time I was wedged between Snake Eyes Shirahagi and the tedious boss run toward Shikabu of the 7 Ashina Spears. This motherfucker in particular bullied me, rubbed my face in the dirt, and took my lunch money more times than I can count, thanks to a legitimately broken grab. FromSoft, I know this game is 5 years old, but I'm gonna need you to go ahead and patch this. It's never too late for reparations. At one point, she had me on the floor in real life, looking like Yamcha after the Cyberman used self-destruct on him. And as the icing on the cake, after hours of attempts, the recording where I finally beat her ass got corrupted. But I do have the footage of the very first time I ran into her twin.
You understand it now?
I cannot fully describe the unbridled joy I got from no diffing this motherfucker after spending so much time suffering from essentially the exact same boss a few hours before. And that right there, that single moment of feeling like the chosen one, is why sometimes you got to see it through, my boy. I didn't really click with Sekiro's combat until about 10 hours in, and there were many times I wanted to call it quits. I legitimately uninstalled the game during my struggles with Shirahagi, but like that girl you know that keeps coming back to the guy she'd probably be better off without, I didn't stay away for long. So if I'm such a big advocate for calling it quits when a game isn't striking the right chords, why did I stick with Sekiro all the way to the end credits? Now I'm gonna be honest, that sunken cost fallacy that we talked about earlier definitely had a horse in this race. I've been working my way through the FromSoft games for the past year or so, and this is the first one I would say I had a mostly negative experience with. But I'll admit that a part of me didn't want an absent completion in their catalog 2 games before 2022's Game of the Year. But that wasn't the main reason. Even though a sizable chunk of my time with Sekiro was spent in misery, after distancing myself from it, I always had the urge to come back. I had this feeling that if I stuck with it and took my licks, eventually the game would get easier, and for the most part I was right. Funnily enough, I think my experience with the other Souls games is what really instilled this in me. Your first Souls game will 100% kick your ass, but the subsequent games become substantially easier the more you spend time with them and become accustomed to their ebb and flow. Sekiro's combat and game systems differ pretty vastly from the others, but the same rules apply. And this is really the case with anything. Jimi Hendrix didn't wake up one day and decide he was going to be one of the greatest guitar players of all time. The same way LeBron hasn't always been able to dunk. Jury's still out on that one, actually. Certain games require you to put in some work, and it's good to remind yourself that you've got to be bad at something before you can be good at it. Particularly when difficulty is the point of contention like it is here, the moments when you finally start seeing success and can feel yourself improving are some of the best feelings you can get through this medium. Depending on your type of salt, they can potentially make all of the pain and suffering worth it. And I want to stress that that's really dependent on your personality type. If you're someone that likes the grind and can take a beating, you probably fall under that category. But if you're like me and get more frustrated at time lost than rewarded for challenge toppled, it may be better to call it quits before keyboards get smashed. But either way, challenges are really what gaming is about at its core, right? A game without something to overcome is like a movie without a plot. Whether it's the first time you have a winning run in a roguelike, taking down a raid boss in an MMO, or paying off your final mortgage and escaping the death grip Tom Nook has on you in Animal Crossing. All of these are uphill battles, and all of them are extremely rewarding. You miss out on these feelings of triumph if you call it quits when the game gives you some pushback. And generally speaking, regardless of what game you're playing, sticking it out when things get tough makes future endeavors within the game easier. Even though the 4 bosses I mentioned before dragged me through the mud, there were quite a few of them down the road that I completely steamrolled. Lady Butterfly only took me 2 tries, the Guardian Ape 3, and Genichiro, who apparently gave other players a lot of trouble, got stomped out the very first time our swords clashed. There's also something about experiencing media in its entirety that I don't want to discount. Like this video, you should watch it until the very end and leave a like and comment so I can escape the C-Prism stone chains of capitalism.
Yeah, that brother's starving.
Seriously though, quitting on a game potentially means missing out on cool bosses, beautiful vistas, and heart-wrenching story beats. You know the age-old saying, if you don't trudge through the catacombs of Carthus, you don't get to see Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, or something like that. The problem here is you don't know what you don't know, and there's also room for disappointment. There's every chance a game is gonna have a Game of Thrones Season 8 or Ending of Lost moment, and short of turning to YouTube or Google and risking spoilers, there isn't really a way to see if the juice is worth a squeeze. And furthermore, the gameplay itself should be the driving force behind witnessing these great moments, not the prospect of them alone. With a bit of second act expectation subversion out of the way, there's one more thing I want to look at. We've looked at both sides of the quitting coin, but it's also important to evaluate. One of the first things that I look at when I'm on the fence about shelving a game is how far into it I am. If you're 5 hours into a 100-hour RPG and you already aren't enjoying it, that's a pretty good sign that either the game isn't for you or now isn't the right time for it. Now this should not be the only deciding factor, specifically when you're near the beginning of a game, because some games just have slow starts. Looking at you, Kingdom Hearts. But even in that case, the game should at least do a good job of introducing you to its gameplay and game systems. This is what I pay attention to when it feels like things are moving at a snail's pace in the beginning of a game, and if I like what I'm playing, it's a good indication to stick things out. Reddit, How Long to Beat, and game reviews are also good references. On the other hand, you have situations where you're a bit further into a game and you suddenly find yourself not having fun even though you previously were. This could be a sign of burnout or that you've hit a particularly rough moment in the game. Maybe a switch up in gameplay like Prey, or an area that didn't quite get enough love from the sculptor's chisel. In either case, a little break might be enough to get you back into the groove, but don't be afraid to do some googling and get an idea of how long the rough patch will be. In Prey's case, it was the rest of the damn game, which was the biggest deciding factor in my decision to quit. A telltale sign that it's time for me to shelve a game is when playing it starts to feel like work. Not like this. We like this. I also don't mean the routine an MMO or comfort game can provide you. I mean when I find myself playing a game out of obligation rather than desire. When I'm looking at my desktop trying to figure out what to play and the little voice in my head goes, "You haven't touched this game in a while. You should probably boot this up," even though it's not necessarily what you're looking for. If you have to force yourself to play a game, that probably means it's time to put it on the back burner. And on that note, just because a game isn't clicking with you now doesn't mean it never will. It took me 3 tries across 7 years to get into the Souls games. Cyberpunk has been calling out to me after all the big updates and edge runners, and I have on this channel record of me saying that I probably would never play that again. I just beat Eastward after multiple startups, never made it past the 2-hour mark, and unlike Prey, that game will be featured in my wrap-up video for 2024. So I don't want you leaving this thinking that putting a game down means that you should never come back to it. You will know what games you don't want to play any more of. Add the other ones to the backlog and let them simmer until it's the right time to take them off the stove. The final thing to ask yourself, and I know it sounds obvious, but are you having fun? That sounds stupid, but it's so easy to fall into the trap of rage playing or playing something that's familiar but not necessarily fun. Familiarity isn't bad, but familiarity at the cost of enjoyment is. I struggle with this a lot as someone that makes content. I'll be playing through a game that I have thoughts on, but I'm not sure if I want to talk about it, so I'll keep playing it and recording for the chance that I might want to feature it in a video or use it as B-roll. And that's fine when I've set aside time specifically to do that, but in play sessions where I just want to relax and enjoy something, that shouldn't be the case. I know it's usually time to move on to something different when I've had multiple play sessions or I've played for a while and that time has been filled with nothing but frowns and disgruntled whispers. For Prey, hours filled with frustration had gone by and I'd reached a point where I no longer wanted to play the game. But Sekiro had moments of triumph and joy and genuine fun sprinkled in with the disdain that kept me going. Your breaking point is really going to depend on your player personality. If you're someone that likes to be in the mud, you live for that feeling of overcoming a tough challenge, you aren't likely to feel the desire to give up due to a game's difficulty. The same way someone that enjoys exploration and discovering new things probably won't give up on a game that's more hands-off with its guidance. You'll have to look at what specific parts of the game aren't meshing with you and determine whether there's something that's going to be a slight nag or completely ruin the experience. There are so many games with robust combat systems, deep stories, and fleshed out worlds to explore, from different genres, publishers, and time frames. It's impossible for us to experience them all, but what we can do is make the most of the time we have to spend on them. Lately, whenever it's time for me to start a new game, I've been purposely putting an hour or 2 into 3 from my backlog. I play through whichever I like the most and add the other 2 back to the backlog until it's time to pick a new game. I like this because I know I'm not going to play 3 games at the same time, so it takes me out of the mindset of needing to finish something just because I've started it. You might adopt a similar strategy to get you in the habit of putting stuff down when it's not right for you. If you take anything away from this video, let it be that your time is valuable and you should spend it doing things you enjoy. I know this video and channel focus on video games, but most of what I talked about applies to almost anything. If you like drawing or making music or playing sports, prioritize it. Time is going to fly by and you don't want to wake up in 10 years wishing that you'd have spent more time doing stuff that you enjoy. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said or feel like I missed something, let me know down in the comments. Thank you for watching until the very end and I'll see you in the next one.